The day I found my Purple Heart in a garbage landfill, I learned something that hurt more than the bullet that had earned it. My own family had thrown it away. I stood ankle-deep in black trash bags behind the county transfer station, wearing work gloves a sanitation worker had handed me out of pity. The smell of rotting food and wet cardboard hung in the July air, but I barely noticed. All I could see was the small wooden presentation case, lying half-open beneath a broken lamp. Mud covered the velvet lining. Coffee grounds clung to the metal. The purple ribbon was stained brown. For a long moment, I simply stared, not because of what it was, because of where it was. The Purple Heart isn't awarded for bravery. It isn't earned by winning battles. It isn't given for perfect service. It's awarded because someone tried to kill you and almost succeeded. Every Purple Heart carries a price. Mine happened to be 17 inches of scar tissue running across the left side of my back. I picked up the medal with shaking hands. A sanitation worker named Eddie removed his cap. "You find what you were looking for?" I nodded. My family threw it away. His weathered face tightened. "I'm sorry, brother." He didn't ask questions. Veterans rarely do. Some stories announce themselves without words. I slipped the medal into my pocket and climbed back into my pickup truck. The drive home took 32 minutes. I spent every mile wondering which hurt more, the garbage, or knowing someone I loved had decided it belonged there. My name is Michael Carter. I served 21 years in the United States Army before retiring as a first sergeant. Afghanistan, Iraq, 2 Purple Hearts, 1 Bronze Star, more memories than sleep. Most people think coming home is the happy ending. It isn't. Coming home is where the real fight begins. You leave behind a war zone only to discover the people you love have been fighting a different battle without you. Sometimes they've learned to live without you. 3 months earlier, my wife, Karen, had passed away after a 2-year battle with pancreatic cancer. We'd been married 34 years, long enough to finish each other's sentences, long enough that silence had become its own language. After the funeral, our children insisted on helping clean the house. "You shouldn't have to do this alone, Dad." It sounded thoughtful, loving, exactly what good sons and daughters should say. I believed them. For 3 weekends, they sorted closets, packed boxes, labeled donations, carried furniture. I thanked them every evening. When they finally finished, the house looked strangely unfamiliar. Cleaner, larger, quieter. I assumed grief simply changed the way rooms felt. I didn't know they had made decisions without asking me, decisions they believed were practical. My daughter Emily called first. "Dad? Hey, sweetheart. We donated a lot of the military stuff." "What military stuff?" "You know," she hesitated. "The old boxes." Something inside me tightened. "What boxes?" "The uniforms, my deployment gear. I thought you said those were staying. They were dusty. I'll clean them." "We thought," another pause, "it would help you move forward. Move forward." People who have never worn a uniform love those words, as though memories live inside cardboard boxes, as though throwing away objects somehow erases grief. I drove home immediately. The attic looked different. Half the shelves were empty. The old olive-green footlocker that had followed me through 5 duty stations was gone. So were the shadow boxes Karen had spent years arranging. Unit patches, challenge coins, photographs, letters, everything. I called my oldest son, David. "Hey, Dad, where's my footlocker?" "Oh," his voice became cautious. "We donated most of it." "You what?" "We talked about it." "No, you talked. I wasn't part of that conversation." "Dad, you always said none of that stuff mattered." I said, "Medals don't make a man. That's different. We figured you'd never even notice." I looked around the attic. Empty shelves stared back at me. I noticed. The call ended less than a minute later. No yelling, no insults, just silence. Sometimes disappointment doesn't need volume. The following morning, I drove to the local veterans thrift store. Nothing. Then the Salvation Army. Nothing. 2 pawn shops. Nothing. Finally, a donation center volunteer remembered seeing military items. They couldn't sell most of it. What happened? They sent everything to county surplus. Yesterday, my stomach dropped. County surplus emptied unsold donations into landfill processing every Thursday. That day was Thursday, which explained why I now stood in a mountain of garbage holding the only thing I'd managed to recover, my Purple Heart. Everything else was gone, or so I believed. That evening, I sat alone on my back porch. Karen's rocking chair beside mine remained empty. I often caught myself turning toward it before remembering. The cicadas hummed. The sun disappeared behind the trees. Then headlights rolled slowly into my driveway. It was Emily. She stepped out carrying a casserole dish, the same recipe her mother used to make every Sunday. I thought you hadn't eaten. I haven't. She smiled weakly. I figured. She noticed the Purple Heart sitting on the small table beside me. Her smile disappeared. You found it. I did. I didn't know they'd thrown that away. They? She looked down. I thought David kept the medals. He told me everything military had been donated. I only packed clothes. For the first time, I realized something. My children weren't telling the same story. Someone wasn't being honest. Emily slowly reached toward the Purple Heart. I've never actually asked. She hesitated. How you got this? I looked at the medal for a long time. Nearly everyone assumed they knew. Most guessed a firefight, an explosion, a heroic charge. The truth was something else entirely. Something I'd never told my family. Something only 5 people still alive actually knew. I closed the presentation case with a quiet click. I didn't receive this because I was trying to save a soldier. Emily frowned. Then why? I looked out across the darkening yard. Because I refused an order. And somewhere across town, a man who had spent 15 years searching for me had just learned where I lived. Emily didn't answer. She simply stared at me. You refused an order? I nodded. In the army? Yes. I thought. She searched for the right words. I thought soldiers couldn't do that. Most don't. And you did. I did. She looked at the Purple Heart again. So they gave you a medal for disobeying. A faint smile crossed my face. No. They almost court-martialed me. Her eyebrows shot up. What? The medal came later. The porch fell quiet. The summer air carried the smell of freshly cut grass from somewhere down the street. For years I'd imagined telling my children the truth. I always assumed the moment would feel dramatic. Instead, it felt strangely peaceful. Maybe because Karen wasn't there. She'd been the only one who knew every detail. She carried my secrets as faithfully as I had carried my rucksack. I was 29. I began. Our convoy had been delivering medical supplies to a village about 30 miles outside Kandahar. It wasn't considered a dangerous mission. Those are usually the dangerous ones. Emily leaned forward. I could see curiosity replacing guilt. We'd nearly finished unloading when intelligence intercepted radio traffic. What kind? A warning. I looked toward the tree line beyond the backyard fence. They were coming. Who? About 40 insurgents. Her face paled. There were only 12 of us. The numbers settled heavily between us. They ordered an immediate withdrawal. Everyone back in the vehicles. And? I closed my eyes. I heard crying. Emily frowned. Crying? Inside one of the buildings. I thought it was a child. You stayed? I went looking. She inhaled sharply. But your convoy left. Her eyes widened. They abandoned you? No. They followed orders. I didn't blame them. I never had. The convoy commander believed every soldier was already accounted for. He had no reason to think one stubborn first sergeant had disappeared into a collapsing clinic. I found an elderly doctor, a woman. She had been treating civilians. She refused to leave. Emily whispered. Why? Because 6 children were still inside. Outside, the wind stirred the maple leaves. Inside my memory, everything was dust, smoke, concrete, gunfire. I radioed my commander. What did he say? He ordered me to get out immediately. You refused. I asked for 5 more minutes. He said no. What did you do? I turned my radio off. Emily stared at me in disbelief. You shut your radio off? I did. You knew you'd get in trouble. I knew. But I also knew those children couldn't outrun bullets. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Emily quietly asked, Did you save them? I got 5 out. What about the 6th? I swallowed. Her name was Layla. She couldn't walk. The memory still had edges sharp enough to cut. The building had already taken 2 mortar rounds. The roof was beginning to collapse. I carried her. I remembered her tiny hands gripping my sleeve. Remembered promising her everything would be okay. Promises are dangerous in war. Sometimes they become debts. We almost made it. Emily barely breathed. What happened? There was another explosion. Instinctively, my hand moved to the scar beneath my shirt. I don't remember hearing it. I remember flying. Then, nothing. When I woke up, I was in Germany. She looked confused. Germany? Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. I'd been unconscious for 9 days. The doctors told me I'd lost nearly half my blood. Emily's eyes drifted toward the Purple Heart. So that's when, yes, the shrapnel entered through my back. But Layla survived. A tear rolled down Emily's cheek. You never told us. I didn't think it mattered. It mattered to Mom. I smiled. Your mother already knew. Emily looked surprised. She knew everything? Every detail. When? The first night I came home. Karen had waited until everyone else was asleep. She hadn't asked about medals or battles. She simply took my hand and said, Tell me what still keeps you awake. I told her. Everything. She never mentioned it again, unless I brought it up. That was love. Not fixing someone, just giving them a safe place to set down their burdens. Emily wiped her eyes. I'm so sorry, Dad. For what? For thinking those boxes were just... She couldn't finish. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You didn't know. No. We should have asked. Before I could answer, headlights swept across the front of the house. A black SUV rolled slowly into the driveway. Not police, not military, just an older Chevrolet with government plates. A tall man in his 60s stepped out. Gray suit, military posture, silver hair. He looked at me for several seconds before speaking. First Sergeant Michael Carter. I stood. That's right. The man smiled with unmistakable relief. My name is Daniel Rosen. He reached into his jacket and carefully removed a faded photograph. It showed 6 frightened children standing beside a young American soldier, covered in dust and blood. One little girl was wrapped in a military blanket. Daniel held the picture toward me. You've probably forgotten this was ever taken. I hadn't. I'd simply never seen it. He looked me straight in the eyes. The little girl you carried out of that clinic, his voice cracked, was my sister. Then he said the words I never imagined hearing. We've been looking for you for 15 years. Daniel Rosen's words seemed to drain every sound from the night. Emily looked from him to me, then back again. You've been looking for my dad? Daniel nodded slowly. For 15 years. I studied his face. There was something familiar about it. Not him, her, the little girl in the photograph. The same dark eyes. The same determined expression, only older, healthier, alive. I didn't know anyone knew my name, I admitted. Daniel smiled sadly. Neither did we. He reached into the SUV and removed a weathered leather portfolio. The edges were worn smooth from years of handling. I've carried this almost everywhere. He handed it to me. Inside were newspaper clippings, military articles, veterans magazine interviews, old photographs, highlighted names, handwritten notes. Every article that even mentioned the convoy had been carefully preserved. My name appeared dozens of times, sometimes spelled correctly, sometimes not. Daniel laughed softly. You'd be amazed how many Michael Carters there are. Emily looked stunned. You searched all this time? My sister insisted. She never stopped. I carefully closed the portfolio. Layla. His smile grew wider. She's a doctor now. That caught me completely off guard. A pediatric surgeon. I felt something tighten in my chest. The little girl who could barely breathe beneath a collapsed roof had grown up saving children. Daniel continued. She always said her life belonged to two people, the elderly doctor and the American soldier who refused to leave her. Emily quietly wiped another tear away. You saved her whole future. I shook my head. No, she built that herself. Daniel looked directly at me. She'd disagree. He reached into his jacket once more. This is actually why I'm here. He handed me a cream-colored envelope, heavy paper, embossed seal. Not military, medical. I opened it carefully. Inside was an invitation. Under was Rection, Children's Mercy National Hospital, Washington, D.C., Lifetime Humanitarian Award Ceremony, honoring Dr. Layla Rahimi. Special guest requested, First Sergeant Michael Carter, Ret. I read it twice, then a third time. I don't understand. Daniel smiled. She refused to accept the award unless you were invited. Emily covered her mouth. Oh my God. Daniel nodded. She says, every child she's saved exists because someone once decided one little girl mattered. For a moment I couldn't speak. War teaches you to expect loss, not gratitude, certainly not 15 years later. When is the ceremony? 3 weeks. I looked toward the empty rocking chair beside mine. Karen would have loved this. She always believed that good eventually found its way home. Daniel hesitated before asking, may I tell you something she never forgave herself for? Of course. The day your convoy left, Layla believed you died. I looked down. That probably made sense. For years, she refused to celebrate her birthday. Emily frowned. Why? Because she called it the day someone else lost theirs. The words hit harder than I expected. Daniel continued. She eventually learned you survived, but she never knew where you were. Military records were sealed. Names were removed. Every request was denied. So she became a doctor. I looked at him, confused. What does one have to do with the other? He smiled. She said, if she couldn't thank the man who saved one child, she'd spend her life saving thousands. Silence settled over the porch again. This time, it wasn't painful. It was humbling. Then Daniel asked a question that caught me completely off guard. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why did you really turn your radio off? Emily looked at me. She'd assumed she already knew. She hadn't. I took a long breath. Because my commander wasn't wrong. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? He was trying to save 11 other soldiers. He couldn't risk all of them for 7 civilians. Emily looked confused. So why ignore him? Because... I paused. He couldn't see what I was seeing. I could still picture it. The clinic, the smoke. The doctor shielding children with her own body. Layla clutching a stuffed rabbit covered in dust. I slowly smiled. The doctor looked at me. What did she say? I closed my eyes. Even after 15 years, I remembered every word. Soldier, if you leave now, don't tell anyone you couldn't hear us. I opened my eyes. I couldn't walk away after that. Daniel nodded quietly. I understand. No. I looked toward the stars. I don't think anyone who wasn't there ever really could. Just then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Unknown number. Washington, D.C. I answered. Michael Carter. A calm female voice replied. First Sergeant Carter? Yes. My name is Colonel Rebecca Lawson, from the Department of the Army. Daniel immediately recognized the name. His expression changed. I apologize for calling late. What can I do for you, Colonel? I'm calling regarding your Purple Heart. I instinctively looked toward the medal resting on the porch table. What about it? There was a brief pause. Then she said something that made my heart stop. Sir, we've discovered it was awarded for the wrong reason. I stared at the Purple Heart lying on the table. For a second, I wondered if I'd misheard her. I'm sorry, Colonel. What did you say? The medal was processed under the wrong citation. Emily frowned. Daniel looked just as confused. I tightened my grip on the phone. I was wounded in combat. Yes, sir. The injury was correctly documented. Then what's wrong? A brief silence followed. The kind that usually precedes news capable of changing someone's life. The reason listed for the award. My pulse slowed. It states that you were wounded while rescuing civilian casualties. I was. Not exactly. Every instinct I'd developed over 2 decades in uniform suddenly returned. What are you not telling me? I'm afraid this conversation shouldn't happen over the phone. Then why call? Because you'll soon be contacted by reporters. I looked at Daniel. His expression had become serious. Reporters? Yes. How would they know? The department has begun releasing declassified records related to Operation Lantern. That name instantly transported me back. Operation Lantern. The convoy, the clinic, the explosion. It had been classified for years because of intelligence assets operating in the region. So what's been declassified? The complete after-action investigation. I felt my stomach tighten. The complete one. Yes. What did it find? Colonel Lawson took a slow breath. It found that your commanding officer submitted false testimony. The words landed like another explosion. My commander? Yes. He altered the official timeline. Why? He claimed you ignored direct orders for personal reasons. Emily whispered. What? The colonel continued. That's not what happened. No, it wasn't. I had lived with that accusation for 15 years. Not publicly. Officially, no one blamed me. But inside the army, rumors spread faster than facts. Some officers believed I had gone looking for glory. Others thought I had frozen under pressure. Neither was true. What did the investigation uncover? Helmet camera footage. I closed my eyes. The cameras. I'd forgotten about them. Most convoy leaders had worn experimental recording systems during that deployment. The footage had disappeared after the explosion. Or so we'd all been told. They found the recordings? Last year. Where? They'd been misfiled during an intelligence archive transfer. Daniel slowly sat down. He looked almost as nervous as I felt. What does the footage show? Colonel Lawson answered quietly. It shows that your commander changed his order. I frowned. I don't understand. He never actually ordered you to abandon the civilians. My heartbeat quickened. What? The recording captures his final transmission. I could hear papers turning on her desk. Then she read directly from the transcript. First Sergeant Carter, use your judgment. If anyone can get them out, it's you. The world seemed to stop. For 15 years, I had remembered hearing, return immediately. Not this. Not permission. Permission. Emily looked utterly confused. But why would everyone think he ordered you back? I already knew, before Colonel Lawson spoke. Because your commander changed his written statement after the mission. Daniel stared. Why would he do that? The colonel's voice softened. He believed he had made the wrong decision. He blamed himself for the deaths of 2 soldiers who returned to help with the evacuation. I felt my throat tighten. Mason Hernandez. 2 young men who had insisted on coming back. I still visited their graves every Memorial Day. He believed that if the army knew he'd given you discretion, he'd be held responsible. So he protected himself. No. Colonel Lawson paused. He protected everyone. What do you mean? If the army concluded that civilians had been prioritized over military personnel, the political consequences would have been enormous, so he accepted the blame. And you unknowingly carried it with him. 15 years. 15 years believing I'd defied my commander. 15 years believing my Purple Heart represented both sacrifice and disobedience. Neither had been true. The colonel spoke again. There's something else. I almost laughed. After everything I'd just heard, I wasn't sure there was room for anything else. What is it? The Secretary of the Army has approved a correction. What kind of correction? Your Purple Heart will remain exactly as it is. I looked at the medal. So what's changing? The award that should have accompanied it. Before I could respond, someone knocked on my front door. Not softly. 3 firm knocks. Daniel looked through the window. There are 2 soldiers outside. Dress uniforms, blue jackets, white gloves. One carried a long black presentation case. The other held a folded American flag. Emily's eyes widened.
Dad?
I slowly opened the front door. The older of the 2 soldiers rendered a crisp salute. First Sergeant Michael Carter. Yes, he handed me a sealed envelope bearing the seal of the United States Army. I've been directed to deliver this personally. My hands felt unusually heavy as I broke the seal. Inside was a single letter. At the bottom, the signature of the President of the United States. I read the final sentence twice before the words truly registered. First Sergeant Michael Carter, you are respectfully requested to attend a ceremony at the White House, where the nation will formally recognize the act of valor for which you should have been honored 15 years ago. I looked up slowly. The younger soldier smiled. Then he quietly said the words that explained everything. Sir, they're finally giving you the medal your family thought wasn't worth keeping. I looked at the young soldier, then at the presentation case in his hands. For a strange moment, everything else disappeared. The porch, the summer night, the sound of cicadas, even the Purple Heart resting on the table. Only one thought remained. Karen should have been here. She had waited 34 years for people to understand the man behind the uniform. She had believed they eventually would. Looks like she was right. The older soldier spoke again. Sir, transportation has been arranged for you and 3 guests. Emily immediately looked toward me. Daniel quietly smiled. I think my sister would be honored to stand with your family. I nodded. There wouldn't be a better place for her. _ 1 week later, Washington looked exactly as I remembered. The monuments, the flags, the rows of Marines standing at attention, the White House glowing beneath a clear autumn sky. Only this time, I wasn't arriving as a soldier. I was arriving as a husband who wished his wife could see one more sunrise. Inside the East Room, the audience slowly filled. Cabinet members, members of Congress, military leaders, Gold Star families, veterans, active duty soldiers. Near the front sat Emily, my son David, Daniel Rosen, and beside him, Dr. Layla Rahimi. I almost didn't recognize her. The frightened little girl with the stuffed rabbit had become a confident surgeon wearing a navy blue dress. When our eyes met, she smiled through tears. Before the ceremony began, she quietly walked over. First Sergeant Carter? Her voice carried the slightest trace of the accent she had as a child. I smiled. You don't have to call me that. She laughed softly. I've waited 15 years for this moment. So have I. For a second, neither of us knew what to say. Then she reached into her purse. I have something. She carefully unfolded a piece of faded paper. It had clearly been repaired several times. The edges were yellow with age. I've carried this almost my entire life. I looked closer. It was a child's drawing. A little girl, a burning building, an American soldier carrying her. Above them, written in uneven English, "My hero." I felt my throat tighten. "You drew this. The day after I woke up, I wanted to give it to you." She smiled. "But no one knew your name." I carefully accepted the drawing. It weighed almost nothing, yet somehow, it felt heavier than every medal I'd ever received. "Underscore a Marine," announced the president. The room stood. The president walked to the podium. After recognizing several acts of courage, he paused. "Today, we also correct an injustice." The room grew still. 15 years ago, First Sergeant Michael Carter received the Purple Heart after being seriously wounded during Operation Lantern. A photograph appeared on the large screen. The destroyed clinic, smoke, dust, collapsed walls. The president continued. The public was told he ignored orders. That narrative was wrong. Another image appeared. Helmet camera footage. Me carrying Layla through the doorway, then helping another child, then returning again. And again. The president looked toward me. The recovered recordings prove that First Sergeant Carter was given full authority to use his judgment. He chose to risk his own life to save 7 civilians trapped beneath enemy fire. The room remained completely silent. Then he added words I never expected to hear. He never sought recognition. In fact, he spent 15 years believing he had failed. I lowered my head, because it was true. The president stepped away from the podium. An army aide opened the black presentation case. Inside rested a bronze medal, suspended from a blue ribbon. I recognized it immediately. The Soldier's Medal, one of the Army's highest decorations for heroism involving the voluntary risk of life. It had been approved 15 years too late. The president placed it around my neck. First Sergeant Michael Carter, on behalf of a grateful nation. Welcome home. The applause began, slowly. Then every person in the East Room stood. The standing ovations seemed endless. But what happened next, no one expected. The president looked toward the audience. There's one more person who requested to speak. Layla walked to the podium. She unfolded a single page, then quietly said, "I've performed more than 4,000 surgeries. I've held the hands of frightened children before they entered operating rooms. I've told parents their sons and daughters would live." She looked directly at me. "Every one of those moments belongs to one decision." She paused. A decision made by a wounded American soldier who believed the life of a little girl he had never met mattered as much as his own. She took a slow breath. "My children know your name. My students know your name. My patients know your name. Today, the whole country finally does." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. After the ceremony, reporters crowded the reception hall. Most wanted interviews. Others wanted photographs. I answered a few questions before quietly stepping outside into the White House rose garden. I needed air. Footsteps approached behind me. David, my oldest son. He stood beside me for several seconds without speaking. Finally, he reached into his jacket pocket. He held out a small cardboard box. I recognized it instantly. The same wooden presentation case that had held my Purple Heart. Only now, it had been completely restored. The velvet had been replaced, the scratches repaired, the brass polished until it looked new. I spent 6 days fixing it. His voice shook. I called every restoration shop in 3 counties. I looked at him. He couldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad." I threw away something I didn't understand. His shoulders began to tremble. I thought it was just an old medal. I placed my hand on his shoulder. It wasn't the medal that mattered. I know. It was what it represented. He nodded. And I threw that away too. For the first time since Karen's funeral, I hugged my son. Not because the hurt had disappeared, but because forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to let yesterday steal tomorrow. When we walked back inside, Emily quietly placed the Purple Heart into its restored case. Then she placed the soldier's medal beside it. Two medals, one earned through pain, the other through choice. Months later, my grandchildren asked why both medals sat in the center of the living room instead of locked away. I smiled. So people can ask about them. Do you like talking about the war, Grandpa? I looked at the Purple Heart, then at the soldier's medal. Finally, at the faded drawing Layla had framed and given me. No, I like talking about what came after, because medals aren't the most valuable things a soldier brings home. The most valuable thing is the chance to remind the next generation that courage isn't measured by the wounds you carry, but by the lives that continue because you refuse to walk away. And every time my family passes those medals now, they no longer see symbols of war. They see the extraordinary cost of compassion and the priceless gift of a second chance, both on the battlefield and at home.